Hi, everybody. It's Jessica and Dave here, your Anderson's agronomy team. And today we want to talk to you about soil testing. We have a couple key points to hit, such as why you want a soil test, some of the reservations people have, and then talking about interpreting a test.
I always like to start out soil testing as why guess soil test. That way you know what you have out there.
So when you go out and you're talking to customers, what are some of their reservations that they have with soil testing?
A lot of people, I'd say the top one is time. Now, everyone wants to get out there right away as soon as they harvest, start putting fertilizer out there and plowing it down. I suggest waiting. Let's wait 5 to 7 days, pull those samples, and see if we need to put anything out there.
So going back to that don't guess soil test.
Yes.
I know it's one of your favorite quotes to say. We have 3 points that we have outlined for the 3 big kickers of why you should soil test, and that's know what you have, what you need to put on, and know what's available.
Yeah, that last one is critical to your pocketbook. You got to know what you have out there before you can make a decision on what you have. And even if you do have it, is it available?
So today we want to talk a lot more into those 3 key points to really want to address all your reservations about why you should soil test to really prove the value of it, but also to help you understand what you have in your soil, what you need, and to know if it's available. So before we get into that, taking a soil test, back to square one. You're out in a field and you don't know what to do. How do we soil test at the Andersons? So
at the Andersons, we recommend doing a zone testing. A lot of people like grid testing, but grid testing can mix like soils or unlike soils together, and that's really the key. We want to sample soils that are alike in both organic matter and CEC.
And back to that grid sampling, when you have a grid, say like we're sampling on a 3-acre grid, you're literally taking lines and you have all these squares overlapping your field map.
Mm-hmm.
And you might have 5 different soil types in that 3-acre grid.
Right.
And you're only pulling one sample. So you're missing like all of these different soil tests or all these different soil types that are going to be completely different.
Yeah, and when you combine unlike soil types, it really throws the test off. And
right.
If you talk to anybody at Midwest or A&L, they do not like that.
Yeah, any of the laboratories.
Any of the laboratories, they discourage that. They say that it really throws the tests off.
So that zone sampling, that's sampling based off of soil type. We're not mixing any soils. You're basically picking points of interest in the field based on the different types of soil that are present in the soil profile.
And if anybody's looked at a soil type map, you got all sorts of squiggly lines out there.
Right.
And so it's, unless you're in an area that has only 1 or 2 soil types, zone testing is one of the biggest advantages that you can make.
And when we're out in the field soil testing, we recommend a 7 to 8 inch core with your soil probe. And then how often do you recommend taking soil tests?
So I like to keep my soil test under 8 acres, the zone,
mm-hmm.
and then pulling a core sample 8 to 10 times in that under 8 acre zone.
And then how many years?
2 to 3, not over 3. And anything under 2 really gets redundant. So.
I've heard a lot of mixed out there. So I hear some people saying up to 4 years,
mm-hmm.
but I know 2 years is more of that ideal spot.
4 years can be a little too much, especially with your pH's levels. They can really change in a hurry there.
So now that we've walked our field and gotten our soil samples and we have our soil test result back in front of us, I know 2 big things that we like to look at are that organic matter, which is OM, and our CEC, which is cation exchange capacity. So do you want to talk a little bit about that organic matter?
So both of these issues, the organic matter and the CEC, this is where we can really build our zones if we know where those are at. Organic matter is really good at predicting how much free nitrogen you have out there, because the organic matter is going to mineral out and give you nature's nitrogen. Anything under 5% organic matter is considered a mineral soil. Anything over 5% more classified as a organic soil, i.e. like muck.
Those nice, thick, dense, dark soils.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then playing into that CEC and the nutrient availability, that cation exchange capacity really helps determine how well your soil is going to hold on to nutrients. So the higher cation exchange capacity, so something like over 10, that's your heavier, your clay type soils. If we have it lighter than or under 10, that's your lighter sandier soils. They don't hold on to those nutrients as strongly, and they tend to fall out of that soil.
Yeah, so the CEC is really the benchmark of how much fertilizer your soils can hold. It's just like if you have a 5-gallon bucket, you don't want to put 7 gallons of liquid in that 5-gallon bucket.
Right.
It's just going to overflow and go down the drain. It's the same thing that's going to happen here with your soils. If you only have a 5 CEC or, 2 CEC, those are really sandy soils and they can't hold a lot. So you have to more spoon feed your nutrients, not put a big 2-year load on at one time, because it will just kind of go over that bucket's edge and down the soil drainage system and into the lakes.
Those 2 points, that organic matter and CEC, like you said, those are your big key pieces that help you determine where you're going to soil sample. And they also help really decide that soil type. Yeah,
so when I was in soils class at Purdue University, they always talked about CEC was kind of like a aircraft carrier. And aircraft are kind of like your nutrients. So if that aircraft carrier is big, it'll hold more airplanes to go off and kind of circle around. And that's really what we're looking at here. We're looking at how big is your tank that can hold that fertilizer.
We definitely want it to hold
we
quite a
don't.
bit.
Yeah, we don't want it to go down to the lake.
But if we get too high of a CC and we have too heavy soils, then that leads to
you got to put
issues.
more on.
Right.
See, so you can hold more, but you got to put more on to give off to the plant.
Right. It just isn't there.
It's a double-edged sword. So sandier soils, you don't have to put as much on to give off to the plant, but you don't have that yield capacity as a heavier soil would.
So looking a little bit deeper into that soil test, I know there's a couple pieces of information or a couple units that you want to look at, and they can be a little bit confusing if you don't know what they are. So if you see ppm on your soil test, that stands for parts per million. So you have 1 part per million parts if you have a 1 ppm listed.
Yeah, and some soil tests are pounds per acre.
Yeah.
And so you that's the first thing that you really should look at is the lab that you're using. Is it reporting in parts per million or pounds per acre?
And then an easy conversion too, if you do have something listed in parts per million, but you want it in pounds, the conversion factor is 2. So you would just multiply that parts per million value by 2, and that's going to give you your pounds per acre. That makes it a lot simpler when you're looking at them. But that plays into our next part is we want to talk about the 3 big things that you need to look at beyond your organic matter and CEC, and that's your phosphorus, potassium, and pH. So first, let's looking at the phosphorus.
And that's initial is P, which it's easy to remember. It's P for phosphorus, and every crop's a little different, and the levels that you need would be a little different. And so, if you figure out what crop you're trying to grow, you get with an Anderson advisor. He will kind of guide you on how much phosphorus you can put on without overflowing that bucket.
And the same thing with potassium. You want to look at what your crop nutrient needs are, and that's how you know what you need compared to what you have in your soil. And then you're able to build your fertility plan based on what's available. Yeah,
potassium's a little crazy. Its designation is a K.
Right.
So if you just see a K on your soil test, then that means the amount of potassium you have in there.
And then the other part, we mentioned pH. So we want to keep that range within the 6 to 7. 6.5 is pretty ideal. The reason for that is because certain nutrients are more available at different pHs. And there's a nice chart that we can reference that really lays out exactly where they're available. And 6.5, 6 to 7, that's really the sweet spot.
Yeah, pH it's kind of an oddball. It's not a nutrient, but it's a measurement of hydrogen in the soil. So the more hydrogen you have, the lower the pH is.
And it really affects the availability of nutrients.
It's the linchpin in the whole caravan. So if you don't have your pH right, and it does vary with different crops, but the sweet spot is, like Jess said, 6 to 7 pH. If you don't have that correct, then certain nutrients will be locked up, and
Right.
you might even have them out there.
And that's where it goes into know what's available. So we already talked about what we have and then what we need to put on. But if your pH is completely out of whack, even though your nutrient levels are all ideal, they're not going to be available.
Yeah, so let's say your crop is showing deficiencies in phosphorus. And it sounds kind of crazy, but you might not need to put more phosphorus on. You might need to put like some sulfate or sulfur on to drive down that pH to make that phosphorus that's out there more available.
Right. And that's a really good point. We just want to make sure it's an all-encompassing thing. You can't just look at one part of your soil test report and say, oh, everything's fine, when everything plays into each other.
And there's more to soil tests. We always recommend testing for micronutrients also. But that's probably for another day.
Yeah, like we said, there's a lot going on a soil test, but if you do have any questions about anything further on the soil test, we covered the main points of everything that you're really going to want to look at, the big highlighted parts. So if you have any questions or want any further information, talk to your Anderson's representative or visit andersonsplantnutrient.com. You can also find us at Anderson's Plant Nutrient /agriculture on Facebook. Thank you so much.